what I'm going to do is just spend a few minutes on updating everyone, just to set the discussion. It's just updating everyone on where we are today with the startup nation. Where are we, if on Israel's 70th anniversary, and then also on Israel's 10-year anniversary, having been branded, if you will, by as startup nation by our book and by other efforts. It's about 10 years into that branding. So I just want to get a sense. I'm not looking for. I'm just trying to figure out how quickly I can jump into the meat of this. I'm not looking for Amazon consumer feedback. How many people have actually read Startup Nation, or is basically okay? Good. All right, that's all. By the way, how many people paid for? No, I'm joking. No, I'm joking. Okay. No, this is like an annoying thing, because when you do these talks, I'm sure when Startup Nation first came out, everywhere I would speak, at every book event, there was always someone who would raise their hand and say, "Mr. Senor, I'd like you to know I absolutely loved your book. I'm lending it to everyone I know." And you sort of have to feign, appreciation with sort of doing the math. Well, how many people are you lending? Anyways, so you all know the Startup Nation story. So I want to jump into where we are today, okay? And because there's a lot that's happened since Startup Nation came out that most people aren't familiar with. I wasn't familiar with until I sort of tried to do a deep dive back in. When we wrote Startup Nation, what we were basically saying to the world is, you all think there's only one innovation ecosystem that matters in the world, and that's Silicon Valley. I mean, there are parts of the United States, other parts of the United States, but basically Silicon Valley was the center of the action. And we said, look, there's this other place you need to know about. It's not as big as Silicon Valley, but it's the second most important innovation ecosystem after Silicon Valley. And so we were sort of screaming with a neon light, like neon signs, saying, look over here, look at Israel. But the book was basically about Israeli innovation in Israel, meaning telling people about what is happening inside this innovation ecosystem. So let me just give you a sense here. So when Startup Nation came out, which is 2009, so we're about 10 years ago, when Startup Nation came out, the big multinational companies in Israel were IBM and Motorola, and a few others, but they were the real trailblazers. But there were 126 multinational companies in Israel. What does that mean, multinational companies, and why am I focusing on that? I use multinational companies as the ultimate metric of who, from a business and investment and commercial sense, is truly connected to Israel. Because multinational companies setting up R&D centers in Israel, or acquiring an Israeli company and turning it into an R&D center, or investing in an Israeli company, it's the ultimate bet. Right? If you are Google or Apple or Facebook or Cisco or Medtronic or GM or Ford, it could be a tech company, it could be a non-tech company. If you're willing to say, I'm going to set up shop in this country, and I'm going to employ a lot of people in that country, and I'm going to actually rely on that country for the most important life and death as it relates to the survival of my company, the most important research and development for my company, that's about as existential a bet as you could make on your own company, right? You're betting your company on that country. So when we wrote Startup Nation, there were 126 multinational companies with R&D centers in Israel, employing thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Now, that is the highest per capita in the world. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't other parts of the world where multinational companies set up shop, but Israel is unique in this sense. Everywhere else in the world where multinational companies set up shop, they do it for one of two reasons, or both. One, they want to penetrate a local market. So they say, we got to be in China because China is the biggest market in the world, so we're going to set up shop there. Israel, let's just say its market is nowhere near the size of China's. As Ronnie Chen said, who's a very successful Chinese businessman who brings all these CEOs from China to Israel to invest in China. He's always making the case for why China and Israel should be doing so much together. And he has this great line where he says, if China and Israel team up, it's like we'll have 1.1 billion people, And so people are not going into Israel. People are not going into Israel for the local market. The other reason these multinationals set up shop is for regional logistics reasons. So a lot of multinationals are in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, for instance. Now, they're in Dubai and Abu Dhabi because from a logistical standpoint, it's the perfect place to do supply chain management or market penetration in the Persian Gulf and the broader Arab world. Israel's completely isolated in the region. It cannot do business in its own neighborhood. So no multinational company would say, well, I know the market's small, but wow, if we put a beachhead in Israel, we can like do business all through the region and we can use it as a jumping off board. Nothing, zero. I mean, 23, I think, countries in the Arab League, 22 of them, 21 of them comply with the economic boycott of Israel. Now, there's some softening of that in unofficial terms, which we can get into. But by and large, there's no rational reason for market penetration or for regional logistics access for any multinational company to be in Israel. When we wrote the book, when the book came out in 2009, 126 companies. Now, if you look basically over the last 8 or 9 years, that number, and these were some of the companies that were already there in 2009. So a lot of brand name companies. Interestingly, not all tech. Some, like you see GM there, as I mentioned, some auto manufacturers, which I'll talk about in a minute. Fast forward over the last 8 or 9 years. Sorry, one other point here. Most of the companies were coming from North America and Europe. So most of these a lot of multinational companies in Israel, highest per capita in the world, and most of them coming from Europe and North America. So fast forward to today. Okay, so now you have a bunch more companies added here. For instance, you got Apple there, which is Apple set up its first R&D center outside of Cupertino, California. They set it up in Israel. More and more tech companies setting up, but more importantly is the number all the way where I'm pointing, 360. In less than a decade, the number went from 126, I think it was, to 360. So from Israel's history, from 0 to 60, they had about 126 multinational companies betting on Israel, and now it's almost 2.5 to 3 times that number in less than a decade. And it's been a decade of turbulence, by the way, not only security turbulence in Israel and in the broader region, and yet multinational companies are flooding into Israel. Even more interesting is where they're coming from. So as I showed you earlier, most of the companies were Europe and North America, a tiny little bit of Asia. Now look at this. We have I use 4 metrics here. This nonprofit I'm on the board of called Startup Nation Central, which was founded and sort of inspired by our book. We use 4 metrics to see who's doing business or is really connecting in Israel. The first metric is, have they set up an R&D center in Israel? The second metric is, it could be any one of these. Have they acquired an Israeli startup? The third is, have they invested in an Israeli company? And the fourth is, have they done what we call an engagement, meaning they've planned a trip to meet with Israeli companies, they're doing follow-up, there's some kind of relationship going on. So you can just see where any one or all of these metrics are planted all over the place. I mean, you see it in North America and Europe, but you also start seeing it in Asia. You start seeing it in Latin America. We're starting to see bits of it in Africa. The numbers in India are enormous. So what's going on here? Raise a few points. One, since our book came out, when our book came out, there were certain, I think, defensible myths about the Israeli economy. What do I mean by defensible myths? Meaning they were basically myths, but they were so been embedded into the conventional wisdom about Israel that they were like, you could, even if you were like, you agreed that it was kind of a myth, you could sort of defend your assertion. And one of them was, Israel can't build big standalone companies. Yes, we know they're the R&D center for the world. We know they build all these startups, which these Israelis flip and sell to big American companies, and then they typically move their operations to the United States, to Silicon Valley. But Israel cannot build big standalone companies. So one thing has been, we've seen now in the last decade, and they're not the only one, but the highest profile. Are you familiar with the company Mobileye? Is everyone here? Okay, so Mobileye, for those of you who aren't, is a company that's in the business of visualization technology. So they basically, what Mobileye does is they use a combination of algorithms, artificial intelligence, and cameras to get inside your car and then mimic human eyesight, basically in the car, the driver's eyesight, and mimic the driver's judgment. They are now in 24 auto manufacturers' cars. So they're just like the standard now. They are the visualization technology in just about every car on the road today. And they have a robust autonomous and semi-autonomous driving vehicle program. So why does that matter? Mobileye went public in 2014 for $15 billion. At the time, it was the largest IPO in Israel. And then less than a year ago, about a year ago, they were acquired by Intel after the IPO. Why were they acquired by Intel? Because Intel is in this hot race to build the first driverless car. And Intel made the decision, Intel, which already has 10,000 employees in Israel, they're one of the largest private sector employees in Israel. Intel made the decision we are going to put these guys at Mobileye in charge of our global semi-autonomous and autonomous vehicle program. So they are the team now. So what does that actually mean operationally? Well, for one thing, you've got, at the time of acquisition, you had 600 Mobileye employees in Israel. 600 employees were now merged with the 10,000 Intel employees already in Israel. And this guy, Amnon Shashua, who's the co-founder, was put in charge of all these employees in Israel. And this has never been done before, Intel said, and we have got employees all over the world. And we are going to put you, Amnon, and your Israeli team in charge of the entire Intel auto program around the world. So suddenly you have thousands and thousands of employees all over the world reporting to Mobileye, which is not just in Israel, it's in Jerusalem. A lot of people don't think of Jerusalem in the tech scene. It's headquartered in Jerusalem. So the notion that an Israeli entrepreneur cannot build, and by the way, Amnon said the only way this will work is, yes, we are technically owned by you, but A, we stay in Israel, and B, we are a standalone company. So it has a more of a joint venture structure. So Mobileye is actually a standalone company. Now, the staying in Israel part is interesting. It used to be that Israeli entrepreneurs used to have to negotiate with their acquirers. Acquirers would buy the company. The Israelis would say, hey, we really want to stay in Israel. The acquirers say, no, we need to consolidate you and move you to Silicon Valley. And the Israeli entrepreneur would say, okay. And that was the end of it. Mobileye said, we want to stay in Israel. And Intel said, not only can you stay in Israel, but part of the deal is we want you to stay in Israel, because they believed that the company would be more, from a cutting edge standpoint, more innovative if it were based in its Israeli roots than transported to the U.S. Last week, 10 days ago, Intel's leadership, 26 executives, went to Israel, okay, including the CEO. So every year they travel to a different country for like an offsite. The leadership of the company, 10 days ago, they went to Israel. Amnon Shashua hosted them. They said in Israel that not only do they view Israel as part of Intel's present, but they also view it as Intel's future. Basically, the future of Intel is dependent on Israel. And so this notion that you have to be sucked up if you're an Israeli entrepreneur by these big multinationals, that is over. Another example is Waze, right? So Waze punctured two myths. One, when they got acquired by Google, there was a competition between Apple, Google, and Facebook to buy them. It was really Apple and Google. But when they were in negotiations, one of the reasons, they're all in basically the same price range. The reason Google won out is because Google was the only one that was willing to let the company mostly stay in Israel. They moved some operations to Silicon Valley, but most of Waze is in Israel. So again, helped puncture the myth that you have to get swallowed up by a big company and taken to the U.S., and punctured another myth, which was the sense that Israelis could only do hardware when it came to technology, but they couldn't do things like consumer applications. I cannot think of a more quintessential consumer application than Waze. I mean, does everyone here use Waze? Yes, everyone uses Waze, okay? Literally hundreds of millions of people around the world today use Waze. They don't even realize how much Waze is part of their life. My favorite story on this front is I was once in the back of a taxi in New York. This is like 4 years ago. And the cab driver was listening to some like anti-Israel diatribe on BBC. And while the diatribe was going on BBC, it was a debate about the BDS movement and why the BDS movement's important and why it's legitimate and why it's not racism. And as this debate was going on, it kept getting interrupted by the Waze voice coming on, directing this cab driver where to go. So I think even like people who are anti-Israel or anti-Semitic don't even appreciate how much these companies have permeated their lives.
But Dan, I want to tell you something. I believe that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee should give Waze the Nobel Peace Prize. For this reason? Think of how many, no, not for that reason. How many of you have ever been in a car pre-Waze with your spouse? One's driving, one's navigating. Oops, I missed. How good is the rest of that afternoon? Not good.
So it's true.
So I don't know how you could nominate something, but I'm nominating Waze next year.
Yeah, I have a horrendous sense of direction, and my wife doesn't. So this has really leveled the playing field. So those are some of the myths that are punctured, but they're actually the least interesting ones. The most interesting thing that is going on, that has been going on over the last 10 years, is globally, there has been, this is not specific to Israel, but I'll tie it to Israel in a moment. Globally, the action has moved away from Silicon Valley. It's not to say that Silicon Valley is no longer central. It is. But just to give you a couple data points to illustrate what I'm talking about. In 2007, 83% of global venture capital went to the United States, and most of that went to Silicon Valley. So just think about that. 8 out of every 10 innovation dollars, if you will, innovation capital dollars from around the world all went to the U.S. In 2017, 10 years later, another study was done. The number was 52%. So almost half, it went down to almost half going to Silicon Valley versus almost everything. Okay? Unicorns, which is the term used for technology, but not just technology startups that are valued at $1 billion or more. 218 unicorns today in the world, only half of them are in the United States. So global venture capital is moving around the world, and these big startups that are getting backed by global venture capital, even these unicorns, are living all over the world. So why is that interesting? Because where most of the action is happening is in 2 areas outside the United States. And I'm just going to use crude terms here, quasi-politically incorrect, but for the purposes of this crowd, I think I can get away with it. One is it's winding up in small, rich countries. So small, rich countries would be Israel, Singapore, Estonia. So a bunch of small, rich countries, and even more interestingly, in big, poor countries, what we would often call developing countries, big, poor countries. So India is a big, poor country. Nigeria, which by 2050 is going to have a bigger population than China, is a really big, poor country. Okay, so much venture capital is winding up in these big, poor countries, and so many of these unicorns and rising startups live in these countries, which was not the case 10 or 15 years ago. Why is that? Because these big poor countries are in a race to sort of leapfrog their own situation. They are so behind the West, and they so desperately need major innovation leapfrogs in essential services like healthcare and electricity, and I can go on and on with the range of areas that they desperately, fintech and financial services, they desperately need massive innovative leaps. They have something that we in the West don't really have, which is they have high motivation. Things are so bad from a quality of life standpoint in these countries that they are so desperate to take big leaps, and they have low resistance. Unlike in the West, they're not encumbered by big bureaucracies, so there's not a big regulatory regime established in these big poor countries, and they don't have big corporate incumbents that block out small players. So they've got high motivation and low resistance, and they need to take big risks, big bets. So who are these big poor countries partnering with? They are partnering with Israel. This is extraordinary, and we see this, and my co-author Saul and I have been doing some research on this. We are struck that all these big poor countries are basically saying we need to make major leapfrogs, and we want to do it with Israel. We're partnering with Israel. Now, the most obvious one is India. Okay, so India is an amazing story. So in the 1970s, as many of you know, India was the sort of architect of the non-aligned movement in the United Nations. Which had an automatic lock in the General Assembly to guarantee passage of every anti-Israel vote in the General Assembly. India was in the middle of that. They were, as I said, they were the architects, the orchestrators of it. Fast forward to 2017, Prime Minister Modi takes a historic trip to Israel. First time the leader, an elected leader of the Indian government, had taken a formal official trip to Israel. 7 months later, Prime Minister Netanyahu goes to India. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu deserves enormous credit for cultivating this relationship with Modi, which is truly, you couldn't have imagined it, not 30 years, 20 years ago, you couldn't have imagined it 5 or 7 years ago. So what did they do? When Netanyahu finished his trip in India, in New Delhi, they signed 9 agreements, all related to joint agreements between the two countries on innovation in a range of areas. And in the 3 years previous to Netanyahu's arrival in India, the Israeli government with the Indians, but it was Israeli government technology, had set up 28 what they call sort of areas of excellence in the area of agriculture. I'm sure Yossi is going to talk a little bit about agritech. So 28 what they call centers of excellence, which is teaching now today. These are Israeli, branded Israel. When you see the facility, it's got Israel all over it. Netanyahu visited one of them when he was there. So what's happening in these facilities? They're training tens of thousands of Indians on how to use Israeli technology to increase the yields on their farms. And in many cases, the yields have gone up by 5 to 10x on these farms. Now, if you multiply this across the subcontinent, you are talking about a second agricultural revolution that India so desperately needs to deal with the massive amount of Indians that are moving into the middle class, the challenges of urbanization, and a whole range of other factors. And Israel is powering Like, not just behind the scenes powering, I mean, on the face powering this second agricultural revolution in India. When Netanyahu came and he visited this center, they didn't do advance warning. Word had gotten out. There was some amazing reporting about this. Word had gotten out in some of these Indian villages, and you had all these Indian farmers, thousands, showing up at this center of excellence to thank the Israelis for literally changing the way, like sparking, catalyzing the second agricultural revolution. And you're seeing this in a bunch of countries. As you've probably seen the press coverage of Prime Minister Netanyahu traveling to Africa. So he's been bouncing around these African countries. Regarding this map I showed you, we're starting to see it in some of these African countries. So why do these big poor countries look to Israel? It's not just about tech, okay? People think, oh, Israel, the Israelis are great at tech. The truth is, pure tech is not that hard today. If you think about the availability of cell phones, cellular networks, cloud computing, basically free artificial intelligence tools like Google's TensorFlow. I mean, there's so much out there today that didn't exist 10, 15, 20 years ago that people who want access to tech from around the world can get it pretty easily and pretty cheaply. The barriers to entry for a company that needs tech are much lower. So I'm not saying tech is a non-factor. It's just not as big a factor for Israel as people realize. What is most interesting to these big poor countries and why they want to partner with Israel is, one, first of all, Israel's been doing it longer than any of them. So Israel's tech story goes back now about 25 years. Most of the other innovation ecosystems around the world, it's a story of the last 5, 10, 12 years. Israel has just a huge head start on these other countries. Two, the nature of the problems that Israel has had to deal with in its own innovation revolution, which was ultimately sparked, although not necessarily is not the same today, but it was sparked by a sense of survival, that they were, backed into a corner. They needed their own version of leapfrogs. So Israelis tend to think really, really big. They are not coming up with the next app to order you good pizza within 20 minutes. These are not the innovations that these are, good dry cleaning services, a good dog walking app. This is not, Israelis are solving really big problems because they've always had to, and that's very attractive to the big, poor, developing countries. Two, one of the challenges these countries are dealing with is the future of education. How do you train the next generation in these countries to be really competitive? Now, Israel's regular public education system is lackluster, and that's probably worthy of a discussion for another day. But the training the young Israelis get from their scouts programs when they're young, the Mechina programs when they're a little older, and obviously the military, which we wrote a lot about in Startup Nation, which is the training they get there is sort of a crucible leadership experience. The training Israelis get is the big subject, although not by name, in terms of, they don't call it the Israeli way, but it's the big subject of what in the academic jargon is called 21st century skills. That the skills that Israelis are getting is where the world, if you talk to the business leaders in all these countries, those are the skills they want their next generation of workers to learn. And Israel kind of owns this space. So they want to work with Israelis for that reason. Third, Israel goes global from day one. Israeli companies go global from day one because if you're an Israeli startup, you have to survive all over the world. And you have to because the market is, you have to compete all over the world because your domestic market is non-existent. And you have to learn how to, if I can use the term again, leapfrog the region because you're shut out from the region. So you have to get really comfortable with getting all over the world. So if you're a Chinese company, the market is so big in China, right? I mean, Tencent, which has the equivalent of like a Facebook Messenger network in China. Tencent has already, and it only operates in the U.S., twice as many people as there are U.S. citizens. I mean, just to give you a sense. And they've even obviously penetrated the entire Chinese market. So these Chinese companies, because their local market is so big, they never think about going abroad. They don't know how to get their head around it. ChemChina, which is a chemical company in China, $55 billion market cap company. They acquired an Israeli startup, a tiny little Israeli startup. Why would ChemChina, $55 billion, acquire this little Israeli company that is expert, really innovative in crop protection? Because the Israeli company, when it was acquired, is in 110 countries around the world. So ChemChina said, look, we need a global strategy. The Israelis know how to do business all over the world. So we will buy them, and they will be our global strategy. So there's a sense that Israel may not always know how to go big and may not always know how to scale, but they do know how to go global. And so those are just a few of the reasons, and we can get more into it as to why these big poor countries are partnering with Israel. But I just want to end on one very qualitative note. And this is anecdotal, but I speak to a lot of business people from the developed world and the developing world. And this is a hard thing to say to non-Jewish audiences because they think it's I'm speaking to sort of Jewish or Israeli exceptionalism, but I figure in an event that has been titled Israeli exceptionalism, it's okay for me to...
No, actually, it'll especially be a problem.
Okay, right. Yeah. So these business leaders and governments from around the world, they love that Israel is a country with a narrative. With a narrative. So, Margaret Thatcher had that great line that Europe was created by history and America was created by philosophy. I'd say Israel's probably a combination, right? A combination of created by history and an idea, or history and a philosophy. And I met with a group from Brazil recently that was in Israel, and they just want to talk about the narrative, that how Israel overcame what it did, and how Israelis live with a purpose, and how it's almost like a country with a purpose, and how rare that is in the world, and how Israeli entrepreneurs have that mindset, that orientation is extremely attractive to other countries, and they want to work with it. They're not intimidated by it. They don't feel judged by it. They want it. They want it to be contagious. They want to partner with it. And then lastly, connected to that, Israelis are, and this is going to sound contrarian, but it's true. Israelis are very optimistic. Now, most people who spend time with Israelis will say, "Are you crazy?" They're always, they're angry, they're complaining, they're yelling. Israelis are extremely optimistic. They are dissatisfied, and which is a very healthy mindset. Like in the lab, when you're trying to innovate, is to constantly challenge and question and tweak. There is that mindset of dissatisfaction, but there is a great sense of optimism. There's a great sense among Israelis of what can they accomplish, and you can see this in all sorts of data. Actually, it's not just qualitative. The one data point that I'll point to is Israel's fertility rates. Like Israel has more children than just about any other country. What better expression is there of your optimism about the future, about your confidence in the future of your country, than producing a lot of babies to turn into people to live in it? And that upbeatness, that sort of can-do mindset, when I speak to countries doing business with Israel that have never done business in Israel before, they cite that. They cite this optimism, this can-do-ness, this sort of happiness with problem solving. And so I think that we are going to see over the next 10 to 20 years a massive revolution, an innovation revolution in parts of the world that we can't even imagine, the opposite of Silicon Valley. And the catalytic partner for those countries will be Israel.
And thank you. Seth.
What? Well, first of all, wow. Dan is a dear friend, and he always inspires or humors me, and today he did both again, so thank you. And I also want to say thank you because I don't believe I would be on this stage, although I see Roger Hertog here. Thank you, Roger, from all of us. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for putting this together. I don't think it's possible, but I don't really think I would have ever ended up writing this book if Dan and his brother-in-law had not invented this genre. And really, I don't think you were thinking of it when you did it. You were writing a book and hoping that it sold 25 copies or something like that, and you were going to buy 20 of them. But sometimes this happens. And now there's a whole literature, almost a bookshelf of people writing about whether it's the military or healthcare or other facets of the Israeli ecosystem. So Dan really did create that. I want to say a word about how I came to. Can I have the clicker, Dan? Let's see. I have a feeling that the next 3 slides are going to be you, but let's see. Yep, that's not my slide. That's a great idea. I should have Let There Be Water. Someone doing.
This is great. So this is an economist from Shenzhen University. This is an economist from Shenzhen University in China. People send me these photos all the time when they see random people reading Startup Nation. This is an economist from Shenzhen University on the Dead Sea reading the Chinese edition of Startup Nation. Someone just sent this to me. It was on Facebook. I was like, now we have arrived.
I do think I'm going to rip this off. I mean, let there be water in the water. It'd be so perfect. Okay, let's see. Here we go. No, still no. Is that your? Here we go. Okay. So I'll hold on. Okay, good. So I just want to say a word about how I came to write this book. In part, I was inspired by Dan's book, and I had the great joy. I did end up buying 50 copies, actually, but I had the great joy of reading it in its final draft, and I was quite excited by it when I read it because it was like something I'd never seen or heard before. It took me a couple of years to percolate that idea. And what happened was I'm very involved in pro-Israel activism. As you said in the introduction, I'm on the board of AIPAC. And I felt that there was too much emphasis, aside from what Dan was doing, I thought there was too much emphasis on the gloom and doom of Israel that we talked to each other about. And I thought that there should be a lot more of the positive messaging about what Israel is as a light onto the nations, as a beacon of modernity, and that we weren't doing enough of that. We were talking about the very real threat assessment that's not fake, but that we weren't sharing the other half of the story, which is why Israelis are so optimistic. And I was looking for a medium to do that. I'm not a water person. And then I happened to, by chance, attend a lecture given by a U.S. government official talking about a coming global water scarcity, a severe problem for the world, for world security. And I was going to transform America's foreign policy, America's defense profile. And probably like lots of you, of course, I was concerned for the world. I was concerned for America. But I also said, while I was waiting for the Q&A, so I could say, and what does this mean for Israel? And while I'm waiting for my question to be asked, he says, oh, by the way, and some regions are really going to get screwed. He says, the Middle East is toast. He said, the Middle East is already out of water, and it's just going to get much, much worse. So I go back to my office. I start Googling around about this, and lo and behold, I discovered, to my utter and total amazement, that not only is Israel not about to run out of water, but that quite to the contrary, and I can give you some amazing, oh my God, I didn't know that facts, but quite to the contrary, Israel is doing just fine in water, even though it is indeed in the driest region in the world. Now, when you're thinking about water scarcity, you generally think about 3 or 4 metrics, and I'll just, because of interest of time, I won't go into all of them, but I'll just say a few. First is you think about population increase, and Dan talked about the rapid rate of rise. In fact, you didn't go far enough. Since 1948, of all the countries of the world, Israel has the fastest rate of population rise of any country in the world, 11-fold increase in population. The second feature that is generally a feature in terms of water scarcity is economic growth. The more affluent the society becomes, the more your diet changes, the more water you use. I'm not talking about your jacuzzi or your shower, but just industry and diet and so forth, electrical production, very water intensive. And Israel is the third, since 1948, the third most dynamic economy in the world after Singapore and South Korea. So, and the third feature, by the way, is, and again, there's a conservative crowd, so some of you may be skeptics about the skepticism of the skeptics of climate change. I don't know how we all stand, but you don't have to even get into the climate change discussion to know that just simply on a measuring rainfall around the world, there's been a disrupted rainfall pattern in the last 30 years. Some places have a lot less. Some places have the same, but it comes in torrents, and therefore it's not absorbable by the soil. Israel has lost about 30% of its annual average rainfall in the last 35 years. It's been a severe victim of climate change, or of rain pattern changes, if that offends you. So you would think that Israel would be, as this guy said, toast. But in fact, Israelis live, everyone here, I'm guessing almost everybody here has been to Israel, if not everybody. And you know that it's not like you're living in, is anyone here from Albania? From Albania? I don't want to say anything bad about Albania. Okay, so because I met somebody upstairs who was from Albania, so I want to make sure he didn't migrate down here. Okay, so he went to one of the other places. Good. So it's not like you're in Albania or Bulgaria where you have shortages of water, or frankly other parts of the Middle East. Israel is like London or New York or Paris. Israel, you turn on the water 24/7. You get healthy, clean, safe water anytime you want. It's the only country in the Middle East, by the way, but that's true. Every other country has partial delivery of water 2 or 3 days a week. You have to put the water into a cistern and draw it down. And if you use it up, you have to either suffer or you have to get a water truck to come and deliver very expensive water. So that's the first thing. So Israelis live like Westerners in terms of water. Second of all is, for national security reasons, Israel made a decision that they were going to be self-sufficient in food, because they could always be boycotted and there could be a blockade of the country. So they built out an agricultural system. Now, we're city folks. How many of you grew up on farms here? Nobody. Okay, good. So it's between 70 and 85% of a country's fresh water is used for agriculture. And in Israel, that's the same story about that, just under 70%. So therefore, with so much water being used for agriculture to produce fruits and vegetables. That's a remarkable story. But even more remarkable is that Israel is a global exporter of fruits, vegetables, flowers, and so forth. So it exports its water. And here's something, and I'll get to this at the closing, towards the closing of my remarks. The final thing I want to share with you is that this is never reported in the New York Times, but 60% of the water that Palestinian civilians use in the West Bank, 60, and 10% in Gaza, and 10% of the Kingdom of Jordan is provided by Israel. And so that also is a rather remarkable set of facts, that Israel is so water abundant that it feels comfortable entering into agreements and treaties that is basically giving up some of its water future. So I became curious as to how all this happened, and I realized with that eureka kind of moment that it was a kind of a startup nation moment. And I don't know if you remember this. We went to lunch, and I said to you, I'm thinking of writing a book. How many of you have ever said, I think I'm writing a book here? Anybody here? Anybody here ever say, I think I'm not going to write a book? Okay. So I said, and I went to lunch. I said, Dan, I think I'm going to write a book. Would it be okay with you if I did it? Because kind of you invented this genre. And you were you looked at me like, are you out of your mind? But I didn't think I was, because I thought like it could have been subtitled, Startup Nation Water Edition kind of thing. And indeed, I wrote the book, and the book has been adopted all over the world. It's now out in 16 foreign languages in 54 countries. It's been a bestseller in a number of those countries. It was a U.S. bestseller as well. And it's been multiple printings. And I think that, obviously, it's not just Jews who are reading it. And I think that this is part of the exciting thing. We live in a sort of a protective crouch a lot of the time. We think to ourselves oftentimes that basically everybody hates us, and the Pittsburgh guy was just, maybe psycho, but more honest than others. But in fact, and I've traveled very, very widely since this book has come out. I've spoken to hundreds of audiences. We are embraced, and the vast, vast majority not Jewish audiences. We are embraced and loved and admired. And this exceptionalism that we have is a very special selling tool that we need to do more of. We need to have more of these books and more of these sessions, and we need every one of you as emissaries, as shlichim, to be telling this story. And that's why I'm glad that you're all here, but I hope that you take from this a message as well. Now, let me just take a couple of minutes, okay, on time? Let me just take a couple of minutes and explain, if I can, just how extraordinary what's going on is. This is not my numbers. This is from a UN body that came up with this recently. These are major world cities that are at risk of running out of drinking water by 2040. Now, I don't have in here Cape Town, for example, even though they basically ran out of water a year ago, and lots of other cities of 1 million, 2 million, 3 million people that are running out of water all over the world. And you're talking about, each of them has a different reason why, including Miami. Miami the water is becoming very salinated because of sea level rise. Every one of these. London is because their population is rising so fast and they can't keep up with production. They have infrastructure problems. Some of them are just simply they're running out of water. And China is terrible. What you don't see here is Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. And I want to say that people say to me at times, and I've heard this so many times that I sort of in my sleep I can give the answer. So people say, well, Israel had no choice. Israel had no choice. Their back was up against the wall. But that's not true. They could have done exactly what their neighbors did. They could have had a more restricted agriculture. They could have had deliveries of water 2 or 3 days a week. They could have not had an unrestricted immigration. They could have said an orderly immigration, 50,000 a year, 100,000 a year, instead of saying 1 million come in if they can arrive all at once. And they came up with this plan to say, we're going to always be, to use Dan's phrase, leapfrogging ahead. We're going to be thinking about what our water needs are, not tomorrow, but 20 years from tomorrow. So that we're always ready. We're going to be optimistic and positive about where the world is going, and we're going to be optimistic and positive about what we can achieve. But we can't achieve it without water. Now, I'd like to just, is Roger still here? Did he leave? He left. Okay. I just want to say is that...
He was offended by the Albanian.
You know, something, I apologize. I think my contract with NBC is going to be terminated, and I'll take the $23 million payout. It's okay. If whoever's from NBC is here, you want to give me a check, I'll do it. In fact, I'll say even worse things if you give me $23 million. Okay. So I want to just take a couple of minutes to share something that really is not widely known at all. Theodor Herzl, who I assume everyone in this room has heard of. Most of the time when I speak to audiences, I don't do a lot of Israeli history because it's too much work to explain who these people are, but this audience, I don't have to do this. Theodor Herzl writes, he mentions at lunch, Alt Neuland in 1897. In 1902, though, he comes out with another book called Alt Neuland, which means modern old land. And it's written in German, and it's in the style, if you remember from high school literature, we had to all read Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy, which is like the world 50 years from now, what the world looks like, and then looking back at it. And it's a sort of a futuristic, positive utopia, look at the world as we see it. And so Herzl sees the success of Looking Backward, and he writes Alt Neuland. And here's what I want to tell you about it. There's a lot to tell you about it, but I'll only tell you one thing. He has the protagonist of the book telling a visitor to the new land of Israel that exists this 50 years forward. Man says, how was this a success? And Herzl's protagonist says, the heroes of our society were not our generals or our prime ministers. The heroes of our society were our water engineers. Now I'm going to share one more fact that I've shared this a handful of times, and I wished I had known this when I wrote my book, because I would have certainly added that to the Herzl story. Yitzhak Rabin, a year before he's assassinated, he's in Oslo, received, not the Oslo Accords, he's in Oslo to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Or is it Stockholm? Where is it?
Stockholm.
Stockholm, because one's Oslo and one's Stockholm, isn't it? The Peace Prize is where?
Nobel's in Stockholm.
Both? Okay, not important. Homework assignment, I'll give you my email address. Everybody should be talking to me later today. Yitzhak Rabin, the year before he's assassinated, he's somewhere in Scandinavia, and not Albania, getting the Nobel Peace Prize. And what does he say? Google it tonight. It'll flip you out. He starts his lecture by saying, I did not intend to be a soldier. I did not intend to carry a gun. I did not intend to be a politician. I did not intend to be a statesman. When I was 14 and 15 and 16 and 17, what I wanted to do, he said, was to be a water engineer. And when you have a society where the best and the brightest say to themselves that this is important, this is not more just important, this is existential. You have a society, of course, we all know they've built a great military capability. We know that. And we know that they built a great immigration absorption system that everywhere in the world we're going to need to learn from, because there's going to be big flows of immigrants. But the third great existential choice these guys make in the 1920s and 30s, and certainly after the state is founded in 48, is that they are going to have an unparalleled national water system that will always be ready for whatever comes. And because they made those decisions in the 20s and the 30s, they are today really able to do something that's extraordinary. And that is in all the ways that Dan talked about around the world, all of those countries and more, people coming to Israel to learn from Israel. We hear about Israeli isolation, although not today because we're talking about Israel exceptionalism. Last year, 6,000 water officials and executives from around the world, foreign countries, came to Israel to learn from the Israel model, either in agriculture or in city management or otherwise. That's not isolation. That's a beacon flashing loudly and brightly to everybody saying, come, 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 and they're coming. Now, I want to open this to a conversation, and I want to just, if I can, I want to just do one thing, which I have never done before. I only have 2 charts in my whole book, and I'm going to show them to you now, and I want to tell you why I'm going to show them to you. I want to show them to you, and I've never done this before. I've spoken 275 times or something like that. I've never done this before. I'm doing this now because of this audience. And I really want you all to have your ears perked, and I want you to share this. How many of you have ever heard the phrase, Israel steals Palestinian water? How many of you have ever heard that? Almost everybody. It's one of the core arguments that despicable Seb Erekat makes every time he's in front of a camera. That we would be ahead if only the Israelis did not steal our water. Okay. So I said earlier that Israel provides 60% of the Palestinians' civilian water in the West Bank, 10% in Gaza, and much more is available, much, much more. I talk about this at length in my book. But I want to show you this. The reason why Israel doesn't have to steal any water is because this is where it comes from. Israeli innovation, starting in the 1930s. You read Ben-Gurion's diary starting in the 1940s and 50s. He talks about desalting the sea. He talks about taking this great resource that everywhere else in the world until like about a month ago was yuck, which was sewage, and he's talking about reusing it. So Israel has the vast majority, 2/3 of its water, not coming from rain. If Israel had not embarked on these ventures in the 30s and 40s and accelerated in the 50s, Israel would be in the same shape as Jordan and the Palestinians and Egypt and everyone else is vis-a-vis water. And Egypt, by the way, which has 10 times the number of people of Israel, but 50 times the amount of water because of the Nile River, Egypt is a water basket case. It is toast. And then finally, where the water goes, it goes to agriculture, it goes to households, it goes to industry, it goes to the Palestinian Authority. It is a robust, fabulous water society and water economy. I want to close with this following thought, and that's this. That Isaiah in the book of Isaiah speaks of Israel being a light unto the nations, an or lagoyim. And I think Dan and Saul did an unbelievable job of showing how in the business sector, Israel was an or lagoyim. And business, some people not in this audience and not me certainly, sometimes damns business, but business is important. But business could be just said, oh, it's just business. But you can't say, oh, it's just water. You cannot live without water. You cannot live a life of dignity without water to clean yourself and have sanitation. You cannot have a life of any kind without an adequate diet, which requires large amounts of water. And as the world is going drier and drier, and it is, as people are coming to Israel to learn from Israel what to do to fix all this, Israel in many ways is a light unto the nations, in many ways is a source of pride for everyone in this room. But in the coming 10 and 20 years, as the world gets more and more dire in terms of water, Israel will evermore be a real light unto the nations. So thank you very much.